Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new Senseability podcast. My guest today is Prisca Winslow. She is a Feldenkrais practitioner based in Taos, New Mexico. She has been qualified as a Feldenkrais practitioner since 1991 and has been an assistant trainer in the method since 1999. The subject that we're going to talk about today is a kind of an introduction to what is functional integration. Functional integration within the Feldenkrais method is the one-to-one work. So a Feldenkrais practitioner working with an individual using touch and movement to help them with a specific issue or help them improve in a specific way. So how we're going to do that today is we're going to talk a little bit about Prisca's own journey with the Feldenkrais method, and then how that has impacted her life, and also then through into how she then helps others with it as well. So welcome, Prisca. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Joe. I'm happy to be here.
So I don't know if you want to give a little more information. Please feel free to elucidate anything that I missed. I know that you've said that your background before coming into Feldenkrais was dance, so maybe you
Yes.
could explain a little bit about that for people as well.
Oh yeah. So my mother was actually a dance teacher. So there was one of my Feldenkrais teachers actually said, "When did you begin?" And when I tried to think back, he said, "In the womb," which is quite true. Apparently, my mother finished the performance with the children before she went to the hospital. So I came out with that influence very strongly. Um, And I did it because it was there and I love it and I enjoy it. I'm no longer focusing on that for many years,
Yeah.
but it was a big part of my life. And um, when that brought me to study um, as a teenager in New York, late teens,
Mm.
and I ended up having injuries like so many dancers do. And I tried all of the things that were recommended, many very valuable methods, but I was not understanding or sensing that I had any ability to listen to myself. I was doing what was taking, and that's not entirely true. I could listen to myself in some ways, but as far as movement, it was very directed in that aesthetic.
Yeah.
So I actually was trying to deal with this ankle injury and my back getting more uncomfortable and painful for 4 years when I discovered Feldenkrais.
Okay.
And it was truly remarkable. It was, I found a woman who worked with me that was recommended at a studio where everyone was injured. So we were doing floor bar instead of regular classes.
Mhm.
And very quickly, I was feeling much better and I was changing habits from the inside out. And fortunately, I had a ballet teacher at the time that recognized that I was doing something different. And she said, go stand over there in the corner, not as a demoting, but go do what you need to do and call me when you're ready. And she was remarkable because I never had to call her. One day she came up and started, helping me out.
Okay.
And that that experience brought me to really start understanding that I had choices in my own movement, even within the aesthetic
Okay.
of ballet, and led me to actually branch out into other forms of dance
Mm.
because I was very tall and was not able to get jobs in ballet companies. And so I was always frustrated. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I was able to go into studying modern and jazz and find work in that realm.
So, I mean, and this is, I mean, through this work that I do here, talking to people, I've heard this experience from many people within the kind of dance and creative industry, where there's a similar setup where it's like, something in my ability or something about my body doesn't conform, or something about the way that I'm taught has led to injury or persistent pain to the point that I can't dance, I can't do the thing that I want to do anymore.
Yes.
Um, and I think that what I heard you say is that you there was a process that you went through, that you came into contact with someone that helped you find that, or have that moment of realization that what you were doing wasn't helpful, or you weren't, you know, exactly suited to the thing that you were trying to fit yourself into. So I don't know, maybe if you want to say a little bit more about that, like the work that she did with you.
Well, the first I want to clarify, because yes, much of the training led me to those injuries, but out of respect to my mother,
Yeah,
she it wasn't when I was younger studying with her, because she was very much about creativity and movement and dance, and had studied with many, many people, so much freer.
yeah,
But I was dedicated at a young age to go away and study, summer programs and stuff. And of course, everyone knows more than your mother.
yeah.
So you believe those. Um, So remind me again, I'm sorry.
Sure.
The
So my question was, uh, you mentioned that you must have had some recognition in that process. There must have been like some pain, or some, physical difficulty with the performance element, or something that was stopping you, that led you to look for something alternative. And
Yes,
and so I was kind of curious a little bit about that process, and what was the work that the person did with you that made a difference, that switched your perspective.
it was very mysterious, which I think Feldenkrais can be. Very
Sure.
mysterious. It was gentle. She was kind. She was compassionate. She
Mm,
was also not a professional dancer, but studied and loved dance, so she respected what I was doing,
yeah.
which I think is essential in our work. Is that my experience with Feldenkrais is that it can help you do whatever you are doing in a way that feels good, and you can raise your ability. And so what was influencing me was the outside authority of someone else knowing better for how to do something than me. And I respected my teachers, and I was putting myself into a mold that, as you said, was not
Mm,
fitting me as
yeah.
I continued to grow. And I was literally told multiple times, you are too tall. And
Mm,
I was bullheaded and determined, and I kept trying to be the elegant, tall ballet dancer while being short at the same time. That brought me to pain, yes,
mm,
to disorganization, to confusion in my body.
yeah.
And the woman brought me through things. So I'll share this with you. It was remarkable. The very first lesson, I was already doing many, many strengthening exercises.
Mm,
Because I could not go to classes regularly, I was doing up to 4 hours a day, lying on the floor, of strengthening exercises.
wow.
Because I was determined, and people had told me I was too weak.
Yeah.
And so she said to me at the end of the lesson, she said, I would like you to stop your exercises. Now you can imagine how freaked out I was about that. What would I have if I did not do that?
Yeah.
And she said, don't worry, I will give you replacement exercises.
Okay.
So I was living at the time in a dormitory style for young housing for young women in New York. And there was a
Mm,
beautiful second floor that was communal, but no one was there during the day because everyone was at school or work.
yeah.
And they had a Persian rug and a grandfather clock. It was amazing. It was very affordable, but it was really lovely.
Mm,
And so the exercises were go lie on the floor and take your hand, and one time turn the palm down, and one time turn the palm up. And I'm like, after doing leg lifts and sit-ups and développés, things we do in ballet, all these ridiculous things. They're not ridiculous, but for me at that moment they were, because I was practicing the habits that were keeping me in pain.
yeah.
And so I did these movements of turn the palm up and down, and I fell asleep. So basically I got about 4 naps a day. And that contributed greatly to the healing. And I
Mm,
think to my healing. And I think that is something that we as practitioners help people to feel
yeah.
is how can you simply, it's not simple, and then it can be, how can you simply rest?
Mm,
It's one of the most challenging things that a human can do.
yeah.
And people say, oftentimes we've grown up hearing, relax. If we knew how to relax, we would. It's
Yeah.
a much more comfortable state.
Yeah. And I think, kind of what you're identifying is that often we are taught the pathway to improvement is um, hard work and um, obviously repetition, but almost like you have to put yourself through something difficult to improve, So like there's a I don't know, there's a painful element to improvement, and the wisdom that that lady gave you in that moment was something opposite. It was like you need to slow down, you need to stop doing the physical straining exercises so that you can reduce the effort in your system and so that you can listen to yourself, kind of find a new baseline.
Absolutely.
Um, and I think that's one of the wonderful things about the Feldenkrais method, that it teaches that whether through touch, working with someone hands-on or in, as you say, in a lesson format. Um, so if we just kind of go back, because when we spoke previously, you mentioned that there was you had I don't know, a realization, or you were very aware of like the way that your upbringing had an effect on you and how you held yourself. And I wonder if you can kind of, because we've covered the dance, which is more like the professional side, but in order to kind of paint a broader picture of like how we as human beings embody our life or are embodied in our lives, maybe we can kind of broaden it a little bit and you can explain what we spoke about before.
So the environment that you grow up in is so influential constantly. That is how we are learning and growing. And when I was 3 years old, my family moved to Taos, New Mexico. And I don't actually remember anything about the place I lived before. Um, and Taos is a really interesting community. And I love it. And I've moved back to it. I've been here most of my life.
Mm,
It's multicultural. And the multicultural aspect brings in a richness that is wonderful. And also, especially in those times, um, when considered outsiders come in, sometimes people respond differently. So it was
mm,
a place where I had to be very conscious of not standing out, of
mm,
not responding to things where people didn't want me there.
mm.
And I'm not the only one to have experienced this, and people experience it all over the world,
Yeah.
when you and but what it did for me are so many things that I could talk for hours, positive things in the
Mm,
sense of um, seeing how we are all human and how we interact when we are feeling threatened. And then I feel Moshe Feldenkrais's work was so much about being able to be spontaneous, being able to um, survive, being able to have that awareness to move through life confidently. Yeah,
mm,
in whatever that means to the individual. And that foundation for me brought me not to have a lot of confidence. It brought me to have a different sort of awareness, not my physical movement awareness. That was through a very specific form aesthetic,
yeah.
but to be aware of my surroundings, to know if someone was coming behind me, to know if somebody
Mm,
was going to be dangerous. So when I moved to New York City, many of my friends had difficulties there, and for me, I'd come home from waitressing at 2 in the morning, and I knew I could sense what was happening. I knew where to duck in and where to,
Mm,
because I don't think of the world as dangerous, but there are plenty of dangerous things.
sure.
And
Yeah.
and so that was an underlying that I did not think of until much later because it
Yeah.
was normal for me. It was just the norm, and we all have a normal sense of the environment we grow
Yeah.
up
I guess I was curious because when we spoke before, you mentioned um, that that sense of like you mentioned just then that like you didn't grow up with confidence based on the environment. You had to keep yourself to yourself, or you weren't sort of outgoing. That in some way those social pressures or environmental pressures, they affect how you organize yourself, not just emotionally, but also physically. So what comes with that process of, not wanting to stand out, or, not wanting to draw attention to yourself, where you're different to everyone around you, is maybe you shut yourself off a bit or you close yourself. Also, in relation to you being tall in that environment, being a tall woman in that environment, it's
I,
like that.
actually, I grew late, so I wasn't that
Okay.
tall until right before
Okay.
I left.
But hopefully what I'm doing is I'm painting the picture of like that there's, there's a set of influences that happen to us as we grow up. And what was impactful on you or to you was kind of living within the dance community and also living within a multicultural community. Those are the two things you highlighted to me. And just, I don't know, hopefully I'm conveying to the people watching that the way that we grow up and the different influences we have affect how we organize ourselves, you know?
Yes.
And that's the kind of like the basis for the work that we do as Feldenkrais practitioners.
Yes, and you mentioned both emotionally and physically, and Moshe Feldenkrais says that without a particular muscular pattern, the emotion can't exist. And so
Mm,
that's one of the remarkable things about this method is that we are working not with a body, but we are working with a human who has all of these. And when the musculature changes, the anxiety shifts.
yeah,
So the point of working with others is not to have them relax. That's a side benefit,
yeah,
that they become quiet enough that when the muscles are not fighting
mm,
each other and fighting the own movement, then whatever learning is underneath that, which we all have since we were born, and if you are a dancer or an athlete or someone who has done a lot of muscular strengthening, that muscular strength is available when the fighting and the confusion of the movement stops. So what you spoke of earlier of the effort, finding out how to reduce the effort and that we are conditioned to think of working hard.
yeah,
Many different forms of, there are many things that require effort and hard work to learn. And if you have the awareness, it is much easier and less damaging to the body. So what we're doing is helping people to become aware in their own being of what actually feels like a more direct and clear and comfortable movement. And that transfers into all of their life, whether they are doing something that requires a lot of work or simply, walking to their car.
yeah. Okay. So, I mean, just to tie that in, effectively what you're saying there is that one of the routes to helping someone with that set of specific things that they have, like their way of moving or the movement difficulties or the pain or the discomfort, is by improving their self-awareness through movement,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
that process, as you described there, is um, it's a process. It's something that you have to, from where you are when you start. it takes time to build, to develop that self-awareness. And through doing that, you can go in a direction of m more comfort, or how would you say that?
Yes, I think we all have whatever self-awareness we have to have got to the place that we got.
Sure.
And there's so much more we can discover, in the relationship of our own movement, thoughts, feelings in whatever actions we're doing. Um,
It occurs to me to bring up the story that you mentioned to me earlier.
yes. So there's a few stories, but the one I'm thinking of is a young man. Is that the one you're thinking of? The
Yeah.
15-year-old. So I was fortunate early on in my practice. It was one of a very early client. And it was a 15-year-old boy. He almost a year earlier, he was 14 years old, was in a severe car accident, and he had literally flatlined in the helicopter. He was in a coma for 6 weeks. And when he came to me, he had already been through some very beneficial therapies. So he was walking, but he walked in a little robotic, very stiff, not much of not no ease in his gait, and he
Mhm.
was really fed up with therapy. He did not want more therapy,
Yeah.
but they heard about me and they brought him to me, and I was doing whatever I was doing as a new practitioner, sensing, feeling things that I had been taught, and his
Mhm.
mother wanted to know what I was doing, and I couldn't explain it to her well enough for her to understand, and she was getting frustrated, and she was watching the lesson, the first lesson, the second lesson, the third lesson. She was thinking it was time to stop because she was paying for something that she could not see what was happening.
Mm.
Because sometimes the work on the table looks very minimal, not
Yeah.
always, but often.
Yeah.
And so the young man sits up and he says, "Mother, let me explain." And at the time, I was living in an area where to get to my studio, you needed to turn off the highway, go down a dirt road, and the dirt road forked in three directions. He said, "It's like driving here. You get to the three-way fork, and two of those roads are demolished. They're completely impassable. She, meaning me, is taking me down the third road." And I mean, to this day, I get chills when I tell the story because it
Mm.
was so remarkable that a 15-year-old or any age could put into words something that we are taught and that we practice and we learn um, in such a unique way.
Mm.
And he
Yeah.
felt in his damaged nervous system
Yeah.
that there were pathways there that were not damaged and were being awakened.
Mm.
I was able to work with him many, 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 many times. And he would have the most remarkable experiences of he would say, "I dreamed that I ran." And then a
Mm.
few months later, he said he ran.
Mm.
"I dreamed that I rode a bicycle." A few
Nice.
weeks later, he rode the bicycle.
Yeah.
And then he started helping his father with a structure and was climbing ladders. And he ended up building his own house.
Mm. So I mean, that's a very powerful story of how functional integration, the one-to-one work of the Feldenkrais method, can impact someone coming from
Absolutely.
a severe injury, having, a pretty drastic restriction in how he could move. But then the work that you did with him, kind of providing a route for him, I guess, out of that situation, you know, out of the difficulty into possibility.
Into
Um,
possibility. Yes.
yeah. So, and I mean, you conveyed it there that he dreamed it first. It was like it was an idea that you introduced into his nervous system in some way, that there's more potential, more possibility here. Let's explore together how to find it. And I think that's that's a really lovely way of describing the Feldenkrais method one-to-one work. It doesn't necessarily describe how it works, but
No.
hopefully it conveys that, that there's a powerful transformative effect, you know, and it can be quite subtle to the point that, the external observer, his mum, was not able to perceive what you were doing because I guess you were just doing some subtle movement changes and using touch in specific ways, guiding his attention in his own body, that, that she wasn't able to see as an external observer what was happening in that moment.
And as a new practitioner, I didn't have the understanding,
Yeah.
of what I was doing, but I was trained in a way where we are trained to be present, to listen, to touch gently,
Mm,
um, so the person can also attend to that touch.
yeah.
And um, it was very different than the therapies he had been doing up till then that had helped him tremendously. They got
Yeah.
him back walking, they got him back moving through space.
Yeah.
He had been moved more aggressively.
Yeah. 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 So
He
it's not
thought,
to discount those
done.
other. Yeah, I
No, it's
see.
not to discount it. It's
Hmm.
that he was ready at that moment to actually receive something and listen to something that was very much more gentle.
Yeah,
And
and much
I
more
think
about
both,
him getting to know himself.
exactly. And
Yeah.
both can be necessary, both can be used.
Yeah. I think that that ties in well with what you were saying about the exercises that the lady gave you, and
Yes.
the strength conditioning stuff that you were doing with ballet, where it's like those were all designed for improvement, and it's not that they don't get there, it's that they get there in a very specific way that have an associated cost in some way, you know?
They they don't they will only get you there if you have the awareness to do them in a way that is not practicing your crookedness, not
Mm,
practicing your imbalances.
yeah.
And that requires listening to yourself. And
Mm,
that's what we can offer is to feel, oh, on this side, I'm doing something very differently than on this side. And if you do repetitive exercises
yeah.
in those habits, then you strengthen your imbalances. And so Feldenkrais can help you to learn more about using yourself in a way that you bring that awareness into everything you do.
So what do you think is because obviously, we've had in a couple of previous months some description of what the Feldenkrais method is generally and what is awareness through movement, which is the public class aspect. But how do you think that the touch element or the practitioner presence is impactful within the one-to-one work? Like, why is it important? What's happening there?
Well, I think it's very important for those who have difficulty moving themselves and
Mhm.
also are having more pain, so that oftentimes there is fear. If you're in pain and you're asked to do a movement, there's fear to do that movement.
Yeah.
When you're working with the touch and sensing, you not only have what we learn to do with our hands of being gentle and going where people feel safe, and building on that, but you also have the presence of someone who is not looking at your problems. We're looking at the person as a human who has skills, who has life history, who has ability to do what they can do,
Mm,
and supporting them in that, not only physically, but hopefully, if we're doing our job well,
mm,
with presence, with compassion, um, and being able to listen where we have the luxury maybe of giving a little bit more time.
mm,
And if you are in a system that you have shorter amounts of time,
yeah.
and that is all part of recovery, of being seen so that you can see yourself, so that you can see yourself perhaps in a new light. Uh, because one of the things I got from the Feldenkrais training that I was in, that I'm so grateful for, and I
Mm,
think many many people do get it, is that that everyone can learn. There is no one who cannot learn. And so we're starting with that basis that you have an intelligent being there,
Mm.
and how do you bring them to sense their own awareness, their own learning ability? How do you? I'm asking the question, but that's what we're talking about. We do it through touch, through support, through movement, through um, yeah, through teaching self-awareness.
Mm. So, and again, I'm kind of going back to our earlier conversation, but I remember the other story that you talked
Yes,
about, and I wonder if this is a good
perfect.
moment to bring that in.
Yeah, and it's funny, these stories go to the beginning of my practice, which was so fun.
Mm.
Um, to just have the gift of clients who would bring something. And I didn't even have a table yet. I didn't have a place to work. I
Yeah.
was I was going to the woman's house. I had house sat for her, so I had met her there, and I would do whatever I was doing with her. And I would come back the next week, and she says to me, "Oh, my son came to visit, and we had a huge fight." I'm like, "Oh dear," I'm a young woman going, "Oh dear," and she says, "No, it was fantastic." She said, "We got all this stuff out, and now our relationship is better than ever."
Mm.
And then I came, another lesson a few weeks later, and she said, "I've been having these curtains that I wanted to hang for," she says, "20 years." And I've been in that situation myself, probably others have too. And she said, "When you left, I went to the trunk, I got them out, and I hung them." She put up the rod, she did whatever was necessary. And
Yeah.
it was such a teaching to me because I had experienced that when I went through a Feldenkrais training. I
Yeah.
had really experienced my level of being able to apply myself.
Mm.
Here I was hearing it directly from her, from something I was doing
Yeah.
with her. Not,
Yeah.
I wasn't doing to her, I was doing with her, and it was remarkable.
Mm.
And I'd like to share that, a 4-year training is much more than having a functional integration because we're learning the process. However, I think what I learned for myself that was one of the most important things happens in functional integration, happens in awareness through movement,
Mm.
was that I felt my skeleton. And after working with my muscles so long, my whole life, I was using my skeleton, but I didn't even know about it. I wasn't balancing it. When I found that sense of my skeleton,
Mm.
it translated as confidence in doing my
Mm.
life. So for the very first time in my life, I actually started having goals. And you would think, "Oh, I had a goal to be a performer," but in some ways I didn't, because I
Mm.
never thought I would actually accomplish it. And I, without thinking about it, spontaneously started having these goals of what I would like to do in my life.
Mm.
And yeah, that was life-changing. So the pain going away, the changing, a different form of dance where I could actually get a job, those were fantastic. But to actually feel like I can do my life and I have choices,
Yeah.
that is the foundational uh, experience that I think of when I work with someone, regardless
Mm.
of why they come to me.
So that's really nice, and I think it ties in with what we were talking about earlier about like the influences and the the conditions that we have with us that we've learned when we were younger, and that in some way, you're kind of explaining that there is a process of freeing yourself from some of the negative influences of our conditioning to open up life to new possibilities. And that that's a really great idea, and I think it's good to articulate it, that there is a process that you can go through, that you learn about some of the ways that you are inhibited, or you experience difficult learning about yourself, building self-awareness, and that through going through that process, you come out of it without those limitations and a new sense of, I can achieve this, I can achieve this. Um, if I can share a little like anecdote from one of my own clients that I worked with, he was a stroke client. Um, he had a brainstem stroke and was really, it was like lost 99% of movement. And I worked with him as a care worker for a couple of years as I was doing my training. So I was kind of like in and out of this environment all the time. And every time, like for example, if I was talking him through a lesson or whatever I was doing, he sometimes would say the words, I can't, right? And like over time, I kind of heard him say it. I heard him say it, and I was like, all right, so this is the first thing that we need to change. We need to change this word, I can't, to not I can, but I can't yet,
Yes.
right? I can would be a step maybe too far for him, but I can't yet is like the removal of the limit, you know? So I don't know if that kind of ties in with what you're saying. It's like that it
Yes.
opens up possibility, and then the person can develop in the way that feels right to them. I think that's the key.
Absolutely. It's a beautiful story.
Mm,
And the incremental um, incremental shifts and learnings and changing, those add up to something.
mm,
And we are sometimes programmed to just look at where we need to be.
yeah.
And so as practitioners, we're able to maybe bring in that incremental and bring it value. And at first, I mean, I've joked I should hang a big sign in my studio that says it's so subtle, because those
Mm,
are very often the words that come out. But the people who decide that, well, the subtle is too subtle for me, and yet I really enjoy coming,
mm,
continue, because it feels good, right?
yeah.
It's nurturing.
Mm,
They start finding out, oh, it's not so subtle. And
mm,
oftentimes when they're saying it's subtle, I'm seeing something quite different.
yeah.
Um, but to say that to them is of no use, because we each need to feel it for ourselves,
Yeah.
that something is shifting. And you mentioned something, when we have a negative experiences, and yes, they can certainly feel negative at that time.
Mm,
Uh, and maybe they actually are, you know, and they always seem to lead to the next part of our lives.
mm,
And that growing self-awareness learning we are doing in a changing body. Yeah.
mm, yeah.
Changing through minutes, hours, years, decades.
Yeah.
And I now have some gray hair, so quite a bit. So I've had more life experience to find that when everything's going great and I'm feeling so good and so able, and
Mm,
then life comes along and does things, brings
yeah.
you something. And that's the next thing that has really felt empowering to me, is
Mm,
that even through difficult times in life, the awareness is building. And there's other ways to become aware. I mean, you
mm,
do, I don't know you well, I know you from Zoom here.
yeah.
But with the martial arts, there's many somatic practices. There's many ways to become aware. And we just have a method that is specific in how we think and how we work.
Mm,
And I'm so grateful I found it. I'm
mm,
so grateful I found it.
yeah.
Not only for myself, but for being able to work with others.
Mm. I mean, there's a bit of me that thinks that this is enough. That we've hopefully. the what we've talked about is actually inspiring. It kind of feels that way to me. And, I think that that's like, kind of enough introduction or enough initiation into what functional integration is or what it can do for you, you know, that it can take you from that, relative difficult experience of whatever you're going through, and through subtle incremental change, you could end up in a completely different place where you feel confident through your skeleton or able to argue with your son or whatever, whatever it is that is meaningful to you in your life, but that process of learning to listen to yourself with the help of an experienced practitioner, I think is kind of a wonderful journey to go on. So I don't know if you have any closing words as well. Um,
I think you just tied it up beautifully.
Good.
I just, yeah, it's people come for many, many reasons, I guess
Mm,
is what I would like to say is
yeah.
that, most of the people that I work with come because they have some pain,
Mm,
but it can be so valuable for, performing artists, for athletes, for, of course, anyone with neurological difficulties. It is valuable to seek out if you are what you said, if you
mm,
are, seeking to have a little bit more clarity in yourself.
mm. Great. Okay. Well, Prisca, how can people get in contact with you?
Well, I have a very old website, but it is up and it's starting to get updated slowly. So it has a lot about dance on it, which is no longer what I do so much in my life, but it's going to be, and that's moveintobalance.com.
Mhm.
And people are free to reach out to me through my email, which is my name, Prisca
Yeah.
Winslow at gmail.com.
And do you teach any classes locally?
Yes, I have Wednesday morning class in
Mhm.
my studio, which I am fortunate to have a beautiful, lovely studio
Yeah.
and wonderful folks that come. I have a Zoom class on Monday mornings that
Hmm.
hopefully will all be on my website soon.
Yeah.
If people emailed me, I could send them a flyer. I teach full day workshops. I have one jumping higher, landing softer coming up this Saturday.
Okay.
Which is
Nice.
fun. Yeah.
That's in person, is it?
That's in person, and
Yeah.
it's made for if you can't jump, it's just being able to pop out of a chair a little more
Okay.
freely.
And
Or
and and the one-to-one work, functional integration, private
at this
practice?
point in time, I have a waiting list, so it's I can't accept new clients
Right.
yet,
Yeah.
but I love meeting people, and yeah,
Mm,
there are other options with the Zoom and the classes, and yeah.
yeah. Okay. Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us.
Thank you so
Um,
much, Joe.
it's been
It's a
great to
pleasure.
learn a little bit more about you and your journey with the method. If people want to get in contact with you, they know how to do it. The next edition of Sensibility, my plan is to look at who was Moshe Feldenkrais. So hopefully that's an interesting subject, and stay tuned for that next month. Thanks for tuning in. Thank you, Prisca. Lovely to
It's
meet
a
you.
pleasure.
Yeah.
Very
See
pleasure.
you
Thank
soon.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.